Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a Friday fantasy football edition of the Big D podcast. Before I introduce today's special guest from north of the border, please subscribe, like, comment, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. We've got a lot of fantasy football and other exciting episodes coming. Hopefully, we've got a U.S. Open theme for the U.S. Open in 2 weeks at Torrey Pines. Should be a lot of fun. I mean, a golf tournament, one of America's most beautiful communities, always is fun. So now joining us from north of the border tonight is my friend and fantasy football nerd himself, Kyle Senra. Kyle?
Hi, Dylan. Yeah, nerd's correct for sure. It's fantastic to be talking fantasy football on a Friday, as you mentioned.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it may seem early for fantasy football chat, but you know what? Drafts are happening, and it's time to win your league and hopefully win some money, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Although I will say I'm definitely team more. I want to win the titles. The money's nice, but it's about the titles and the glory.
Is it the trophy or the nice belt that you get for winning first?
Neither. It's knowing you won. I want to know I won. That's the memories of winning. That the day, week 16, or I guess maybe this year week 17 on whatever Sunday, when you see those players scoring and that final score comes in, or you get such an insurmountable lead late that you know it's done, and that those moments are quite exhilarating, and it's worth more than, again, any fantasy trophy, any money, any belt. I'll take them all. I like them. I'm good. I like those things, but it's definitely just it's all about winning, baby.
Just as the late Raiders owner Al Davis would say, just win, baby.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, they did. I know the Raiders laughing stock now, but they do have a few Super Bowl championships. So, I'm a Packers fan, so I'll dig into the Vikings that they don't have any. Haha, take that, Vikings. Sorry, Vikings fans.
So speaking of Packers, one big fantasy discussion has been whether or not Aaron Rodgers won't be the Packers starting quarterback opening day this year.
Mm-hmm. So my take on it is a trade seems very difficult right now. What teams are willing to give a package big enough, but more importantly, what do the Packers really need? I mean, if they trade away Aaron Rodgers, their biggest need becomes quarterback. And right now it's Blake Bortles or Jordan Love that would be starting. I would prefer an upgrade on either, but I also don't see how a team's giving up an upgrade. I thought the reason that the rumors kind of hit just before the draft is because it was going to happen draft night. Like, I felt that was a natural time. I know everyone talks the Broncos. To me, as soon as the Broncos passed up by the number, or at least as soon as the Broncos picked with the number 9 pick, and A, didn't take Justin Fields, and B, just picked, really, that to me cemented it as it wasn't going to be the Broncos, right? Because if the Packers dealt Rodgers and got that 110 or 109, whatever pick the Broncos had, 9, and Fields is on the board, I bet they take Justin Fields right there, and they cut their loss with Jordan Love, because I think we all admit Justin Fields is a much better quarterback than Jordan Love, right? Someone that the Bears probably think they can lead him right now. So I think that ship has sailed for this year. I don't see a trade actually materializing, because again, Denver, what does Denver really have that the Packers want? The most appealing asset is probably Jerry Jeudy, but how much they have to add on to Jerry Jeudy to get Rodgers, I think tons. And, the Broncos giving up a few firsts. I don't know if the Packers really want the firsts from the team that Rodgers is playing on, because those are probably going to be in the 20s. So my thought is Rodgers either retires or he's playing for the Packers this year. And based on the money, I doubt he retires. So my thinking is he's the quarterback for 2021, but as a Packers fan, I'm embracing for the fact that he's probably getting traded next offseason.
Do you think Aaron Rodgers is just grumpy because in 9 of the last 10 first rounders have been on defense, and the one time the Packers actually drafted on offense, it was, Jordan Love.
Well, I don't think that necessarily, because I mean it's not even what position you pick, it's making good picks. Because I think the pick of Jair Alexander. He's maybe the best corner in the league. I don't think Rodgers has any problem that they went defense that year when they double tapped Rashawn Gary and Savage 2 years ago. Went defense on both first picks. I mean, Savage has started from day one and is developed to be quite great. I know Adrian Amos made an All-Pro team last year, and I thought Savage played just as well. So, only in the second year. So I don't think it's that they went defense. And I mean, the other notion I think that gets overrated with the Packers, we're certainly going away from fantasy and just rant about the Packers, but this notion that they don't surround him with weapons. I mean, Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, yeah, they weren't first round picks, but they were probably better than most receivers that were drafted in the first rounds of those years. I mean, really, Devontae Adams is better than most receivers drafted in the first round of any year really in the past decade. So, and I mean, the offensive line has consistently been a top 5, top 10 unit. So they've definitely given Rodgers weapons in that sense. So I think there's a lot of, I'm not sure how much the tenacity between Rodgers and the Packers exists. Maybe that's me being optimistic. I also think there's a lot of it that's media narrative driven. I think the media makes the rift seem much bigger than it actually is. I don't think it's at the point where he's just going to refuse to play. I'm pretty sure he's going to play because it's a lot of money that he loses if he doesn't, which, to be fair to the Packers, is money they can move over to the next year. So that's why I think the Packers will call his bluff on it. Like, if he retires and they have to start with Bortles, they're probably not much worse off than if they traded him away and got pennies, which it seems like it would be the case. So I'm pretty much on team. He's either playing for the Packers or he's not playing this year at all.
I mean, theoretically, if Rodgers is back next year, Detroit is, well, not good. The Vikings, well, you don't know what Kirk Cousins will be, and the Bears, well, so like Dennis Green was saying, the Bears are who we thought they were. You don't know what Bears quarterback starting opening day. Green Bay would be the big favorite in the NFC North. Rodgers won an MVP. Devontae Adams probably the best wide in football. Aaron Jones is top, what do you think he is, 5 or 6 back in the league?
Maybe a top 10, certainly. I think from a fantasy perspective, definitely in that top 10. I think, I do wonder, the fantasy implications, if Rodgers leaving or not. I think now is, especially in dynasty leagues, is the time to kind of take shape. I just did a dynasty startup, and the scoring settings are a little different, but Devontae Adams went in the 5th round. And
what?
In Superflex.
What?
So Superflex start 2 tight end as well. So there's some scarcity there. There's I think it's like a 0.25 point per carry. So to be fair, like a lot of receivers were faded, especially early. So even 5th round, I think he might have been one of the. He might have been the 4th or 5th. I'm pulling it up right now. But he went. That was kind of the range receivers were going. Tyreek Hill went 211, and then you had kind of A.J. Brown, Metcalf, Jefferson, Stephon Diggs in the 3rd round, Lamb at the end of the 4th, and then in the 5th round, you got McLaurin, Hopkins, Jamar Chase, and then Devontae Adams. So I guess he's about the 10th wide receiver that went off the board. And this is, again, dynasty startup that's still going on. It's a slow draft. Where are we? We're in the 20th round right now. So a little bit of fading receivers earlier. Again, Tyreek Hill at 211 was the first wide receiver to go. At that point, a couple tight ends, 4 running backs, and a bunch of quarterbacks went. So that's kind of just the way it was. But yeah, I was a little surprised too that at 505 there. So the worry is certainly there, and especially in dynasty right now. He's a bit older. I think that the worry is if Rodgers leaves, he kind of has a massive tank in value. So I am curious to see as redraft season shapes up where he's going to be going in drafts, because I think before the Rodgers news, it was kind of accepted. He was the 101 in redraft, I think, or not the 101, the wide receiver one, I think, entering rankings. So it's curious to see how much he's going to fall from a redraft perspective. I don't think I could, 3rd, thinking Tyreek Hill, maybe DeAndre Hopkins. It's tough for me to lower him, much lower than that. In dynasty, I can kind of get it, but wide receiver 5-6, maybe I can get those young guys like Jefferson and Metcalf, Brown, because they're so young, Tyreek Hill. But not many more guys than that. Like Terry McLaurin ahead of Adams, I thought that was okay. That was a little surprising, even the rookie Jamar Chase. But that seems like that's where the flavor is right now in Dynasty, certainly.
Could you explain the difference between redrafts and Dynasty leagues? Because obviously you think, well, in fantasy football, Devontae Adams is going to be my number 1 receiver. But could you explain the difference between a Dynasty and a redraft league?
Sure, that's actually erroneous of me to just assume everyone knows. So, yeah, so redraft, it says it in the name, you redraft every year. So every year, whenever your draft is indicated, you make an entirely new roster every year based solely on that draft. And of course, you could, waiver wire additions through the year and trades, and those are other ways to manipulate your roster. But with Dynasty, you retain pretty much the entirety of your team every year. And there's some leagues will have different settings in terms of roster cut downs. Okay, the roster at this size, this time of year, this cut down to this in season, or vice versa sometimes. But the general idea is once you make that initial startup draft, that's your team the rest of the way. And again, trading is, I think, much more prevalent in Dynasty than it is in redraft leagues. I know I'm fairly active redraft traders, compared to how certain people, especially compared, thinking like, some leagues, there's no trades in redraft whatsoever. So I kind of tend to be a little bit more on the active side in terms of redraft trading, but it definitely takes a step up in Dynasty. I know that's one of the big pulls of it. And the way you add players every year is through the rookie draft. So as on top of having your roster, you also have rookie draft picks every year. Might be 2, 3, or 4 rounds, 5, some drafts even 6. Again, that'll be league dependent, but so that's how you infuse new players into the league. That's how the rookies get onto teams. It's through those rookie drafts, and just like players, they can be traded. So that's there's I guess Dynasty in a nutshell.
What's the one position that's undervalued in both leagues and overvalued in both a dynasty and a redraft league?
I mean, to be honest, it all comes down to the scoring settings, and you get and scoring and roster. Because if you have a league where you have to start 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, only 1 tight end, maybe it's super flex, maybe not, and there's no premiums on any positions, everything's pretty flat. Running back and wide receiver are probably going to be the most important positions. If it's super flex, it's almost always going to be quarterback, no matter what. And like even super flex, like some leagues, you see quarterbacks go crazy early, and it almost thinks some quarterbacks are getting overrated. But then in other leagues, it's a little more passive, and it feels like quarterbacks are underrated. So it's even tough to pinpoint in exact scoring settings because it is all league dependent. But if so, again, compare 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end without tight end premium. Running backs, wide receivers are where you're going to want to focus most of your depth on. However, if the scoring and roster settings say 1 at each position, I only have to start 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end, and 5, 6 flex spots. And let's say there's a tight end premium. Suddenly tight ends become the more viable position. And if your league isn't kept up to that, they become suddenly the position that's undervalued. But I feel like in the previous example I was talking about, no tight end premium, the scarcities at other positions, I find, especially in the middle grounds, there's some tight ends that go early, a little too early for my liking. Noah Fant, someone last couple of years, Mike Gesicki, there's kind of a range last year. I know a couple of years ago it was like OJ Howard, Hunter Henry, and they kind of failed to produce too. So it's even depending where you are in drafts. Early in drafts, it might actually be tight ends are undervalued. Those elite guys should maybe be going earlier than they are. But once you get to the middle rounds, then tight ends are suddenly being overvalued because people feel like they have to get their guy there. You go early or just wait till the end because they go from undervalued to overvalued real quick. And just kind of be paying attention to that. So if you're going to choose to miss out on, I say it's an elite tier of maybe 5. From redraft, we'll say 4 maybe, but in Dynasty I maybe even extend it to 6. But Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, Andrews, and then for Dynasty you can add, I think, Hawkinson and Pitts to that. Maybe even Noah Fant, but I don't know. I don't like that quarterback situation in Denver. And again, I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going there. So I think it will continue to be bad. But if you don't get one of those guys, I think every other tight end becomes overrated and you're better off waiting. So sorry to have a not so simple answer to your question there, Dylan.
So heading to the 2021 fantasy football season, what are some players you're liking and some players you're not liking?
Yeah, so I think a player that I really like in terms of just seems like, and I'll say this, I'm just starting right now my first redraft draft. I've done a couple of best balls, but season-long redraft, I'm just in the process of my first draft right now, and I think we're still in the first round, in slow draft, so not really sure how that's going to be, but I know in Dynasty, Cole Beasley's been going crazy late, and I kind of get the sense it'll be kind of the same in redraft, where he's just going to be going much later than what he should be. Without John Brown, I think he's very clearly the number 2 target. I mean, he was last year. Brown was hurt though, so that kind of factored in. But I think he and Stephon Diggs are just going to feast on targets. And while Diggs is going early as he should, I think Beasley is going to be such a value. So he's one player that I'm going to be looking for probably often in a lot of different formats. But, he's 32. So in these dynasty leagues where the young guys are prioritized, he's going so late. Like in this draft, I got him ridiculously late. I got him in the 17th round, 17-10. So I thought that was a massive value. And I think I mentioned these scoring settings, the 2 tight end, super flex. And so I kind of faded receiver, and to get guys like that at the end, I think is it's kind of my thing. I don't know. I feel there's a lot of good value receivers. I did an auction startup draft, and the crazy value late on receivers, just in terms of the guys that were nominated last. Everyone wants to pay up for the first few, but I got Cooper Kupp and Chris Godwin super cheap just because that's where they ended up. So I think drafts this year, wide receiver is going to be really deep. Don't feel the need to force to draft one. Oh, I need to get this wide receiver. If you're stuck between a wide receiver or that elite tight end or wide receiver and running back at the end of the tiers, I would much favor those other positions, and think I can always just accumulate value at wide receiver. It seems like this year.
I can attest. Michael Thomas was my first round pick last year, and that went well.
Yeah, no, I think I did a couple drafts like that. I know I've seen some drafts last year that went Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin to start, and that was pretty awful for most of the season. A lot of games missed due to injury, but I almost feel like Thomas is actually coming to be a value this year because of that. So I think he might be someone I might actually like a lot this year.
Let me tell you, my first Michael Thomas and Julio Jones were my first 2 picks last year.
Ooh, yeah, just like Godwin. That's not a great start.
And you know what? Devontae Adams was available the Julio spot, and I'm like, who do I pick? Julio Adams.
Well, Adams was coming off the injury the year before, right? So at that point, it seems like Julio was the healthier guy.
And yeah, that went well. So obviously, when you think of Beasley, I mean, he's such a great PPR guy. He might not score a lot of touchdowns, but he could get you 6 for 70 every day, every Sunday. Mm-hmm. Which for being, a 17th round guy wouldn't be bad.
Yeah, and again, I feel like in redraft, it's probably not going to be that late. Again, the dynasty, I think, definitely skews that particular price. But I mean, if he's going in like the 7th, 8th round of a redraft league, I think that's a huge value. So, we'll look. I'll look to see as the redraft season starts. And again, I got this one redraft league going now, so I'll see where he ends up there. But as we get closer to the season, it'll be interesting to see where he's going in drafts, because I think he might be a key value guy. Again, as long as he doesn't creep up into like the 6th, 5th round, and I doubt he's going that early. He's probably going to be a value.
How much could Emmanuel Sanders play in the Beasley's role?
I think Emmanuel Sanders probably hurts Gabe Davis more, to be honest. I think they're probably using him to kind of replace what they had in John Brown, but it seems like Beasley and Diggs kind of have secured roles. And I mean, the amount they pass, a 3rd wide receiver is viable there. So I don't think Sanders really takes away from Beasley. I think Sanders takes away from the other tertiary pieces. Like Josh Allen's going to be less inclined to throw to the running backs or throw to tight ends. I'm not necessarily that high on Sanders. I don't think he's going to get nearly the target share that Diggs or Beasley will, but I guess the only limitation with Beasley is, even though he, all the targets last year, he only had 5 red zone targets. So that's maybe the concern you mentioned with the touchdowns. So he's definitely not someone you want if you're chasing upside, like in that particular lineup spot. If you need an upside play, he's not necessarily going to be that, but he's also, again, not going in a range where you're drafting him to be an every week starter. You can pick the matchups with him. Games where we think the Bills are going to be in a shootout and the passing attempts are going to be higher, and he's going to really accumulate those catches, or games where you kind of need a safe PPR floor type player. Those are where you're going to favor him. In games where you feel like you really need to be aggressive, I need that upside, then you draft other receivers. So again, the other thing too is balance, right? So if you're going to draft Beasley, also draft a Henry Ruggs type, or a Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I don't even think the Packers too much, but the deep threat types, right? Like that's like how you kind of complement them. And then you every week you kind of make that decision. Okay, do I need the upside or the safety based on your opponent, but also look at their matchups? So that's kind of how I would approach a bit of strategy there.
And now, name somebody you of totally fading right now.
Tough to see anyone that's completely off in terms of price. Um, Again, I would say the early reach on wide receiver is what I'd look to avoid. So I don't know. Again, it seems like it was going to be Adams almost. Like, Adams might have crept into like a 106. That's not when I really want to take a wide receiver there. I want to guarantee a running back in those first two picks, and in that elite tier, I'm not guaranteed getting it around the turn in the second. So I would say something like that. Whatever wide receiver you feel like taking in the top half of the first round, that's the guy that I'm going to avoid. I think not to make a vague answer, but I just feel like for the most part, I think I want to avoid wide receiver in the first round altogether. Like I'd rather take a Kelsey, even a Kittle. Give me that positional difference at tight end because wide receiver, there's so many. So I'll say any first round wide receiver. First round fantasy.
Now you just made my fantasy draft so much easier. I'm like, unless all the tight ends and running backs are gone when I pick, I'm not taking a wide receiver in the first round.
Well, I'm looking at the math. Okay, so I guess it's depending. How many tight ends do you think are worth taking in the first round? I think Kelsey's kind of a lock, and then is Kittle the second, or do you have another? Two. You say two. So who's the second? Assuming
Kittle and Kelsey.
Kittle and Kelsey, yeah. I wonder how much of an argument Waller makes, but I don't think he's ever going to get to the first round. So if, in a 12-team league, that's only 10 running backs. I mean, if I'm just counting through quickly, CMC, Cook, Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott. You already mentioned Aaron Jones.
Did you say Kamara?
Yeah, I said Kamara. I really like Cam Akers this year. I thought he really showed out well last year. I've never been a real Darrell Henderson fan. I think Akers is much more talented. And I think based on the usage last year, at the end of the season, the Rams know that too. So I think Akers is going to get a massive workload. We're already at 8 running backs. Like that's the 110. I don't know if you feel about Swift, if you like Swift. I didn't even mention Derrick Henry for redraft. Like, especially from a redraft perspective, Henry goes there. So you can easily get to 10 running backs. So I think there's no need to take the wide receiver. Again, if there's certain formats, if there's certain, like, let's say in a league where you have to start 4 wide receivers and there's no tight end premium and there's not much RB scarcity, like you only have to start 1, maybe 2, a ton of flex spots where you want to be super deep at wide receiver, that might be the type of league where you'd go about it, but it's got to be really specific formats where the wide receiver becomes the most important position. That's really the only type of league. And it's, again, really super specific, and everything else is depressed. Like, it's not super flex. So yeah, I think maybe that's just, I mean, listing all players, but one player in particular is just whatever the first wide receiver is. Don't be, if you take the first wide receiver mid-second, that's amazing. That's great. That's the value you wanted, but not in the first round.
Could part of the problem be with running backs is that running backs are there every week, but some running backs just have bad years or get hurt? I mean, CMC, Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, all underperformed or got hurt in some way or form last year.
But I mean, Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin, Julio Jones all got hurt. George Kittle. It's not just a running back problem. In fact, actually, the injury rate at tight ends is higher than it is at running backs. So you're actually making a bigger risk taking those tight ends. Although I think the risk reward is worth it. But I think the thing with running backs, it's the predictable usage. Going in, this guy's probably going to see double-digit carries, at least those workhorses. We know they're probably going to see 15 touches between a combination of carries and receptions. Even the best wide receivers can get kind of phased out if they face blanket coverage or a team really sets their mind on, we're not letting that player catch the football. That's going to be a lot harder to kind of, or that's easier to do, than it is say, oh, we're not going to let them hand off. I mean, if they want to choose to give that running back a carry, the other team doesn't really have a say in that. You can put up enough points that they can't run the football, but again, it's difficult. So even the most consistent wide receivers are still going to be up and down. So I think that's leading with me. Now, with the 17-game schedule, more games, do teams suddenly use running backs differently and there's no more workhorses? Sure, maybe. Maybe that is a risk this year. Maybe the people who are going wide receiver early are going to look back on us and laugh at us all. So, that possibility does exist, but I still feel like the elite running backs, they're going to get a ton of touches because they're so much more talented than the backups. Teams that are competing are definitely going to want to give those players everything they can handle.
Now, speaking of podcasts, I'm not the only one with a podcast here. Could you talk about your podcast?
Sure thing. So I've got a couple of projects. So first, I'm with Full Press Coverage. I've got the Full Press Fantasy Pod, as well as the Full Press Packers Pod. So obviously the fantasy one, mostly fantasy football centric. I know we've done a couple episodes looking at different fantasy sports. A couple years, or last year, I think we did a couple of fantasy baseball episodes. Usually do some fantasy hockey drafts as well. So sometimes incorporate those in. But for the most part, it's fantasy football centric. And then the Full Press Packers Pod, it's literally just about the Packers. I'll sometimes throw some fantasy stuff in there, but rarely. But I try not to. It's really just about Packers news. I know the most recent episode that was just released, actually, my co-host Jesse Hall and I, we counted down the top 10 Packers seasons in history, which is a fun thing to do as Packers fans. There's so many titles. But so now that we're in the off season, we're going to maybe do some more rankings, best Packers players at different positions, maybe overall. So those types of lists are going to be coming in this offseason. So a lot of fun stuff there. From the hat, you can also see I'm with Going for Two. And I have a couple of shows on the Going for Two live network. I've got Press Coverage, which airs every second Monday, including the upcoming Monday, which will be June 7th. I believe we're going on at 5:30 Eastern time. I've got John Lobb. And the premise of Press Coverage is a one-on-one interview show with fantasy analysts and people in the industry, and less about the actual fantasy football talk. There are some questions relating to it, but it's mostly about getting to know these analysts and know a lot about their other hobbies outside of fantasy, their life progression to get into fantasy sports and football in general. And so, a lot of getting to know a lot of really good people in that. And then I also have the Dynasty Gambit, which I'm a co-host of on the Going for Two live network. And that one is a lot of just dynasty talk. A lot of I always like to throw game theory, as you can see from these interviews. You ask me, well, what's the specific player? And I'm giving you a whole process of this archetype. I am geared, especially from a lot of times it is the game theory side, the different strategies, not just with drafting, trading, and different types of processes. So definitely bring that to the Dynasty Gambit. We do talk player evaluation. Sometimes we look at someone's roster and kind of hint at, okay, what are the things they can do? And again, back to the big game theory talk that I try to bring in. So, all those shows. So Full Press Fantasy Pod, Full Press Packers Pod, and then on the Going for Two live network, we got Press Coverage and the Dynasty Gambit.
I've got a question. What would the number one Packers season be? Would it be 66, 67, 97, or the year Aaron Rodgers won his one and only Super Bowl?
I don't know. 'Cause I don't know if I want to give it away on the show, because I'll tell you, it's actually none of those.
Ooh.
So maybe people, maybe I'll recommend people to go listen. I'm pretty sure all of those seasons, both Jesse and I had in the top 10. So we definitely do talk about all of those years. But yeah, the number one Packers seasons actually isn't one of those that you mentioned. So I'll leave it at that. I'll let people go listen for themselves. I'll mention to you off camera if you want, Dylan. I won't leave you too much in suspense, because you've been so gracious to have me on your podcast. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Kyle, and hopefully the Packers are in LA for the Super Bowl. And could Aaron Rodgers be the first Jeopardy host to be a Super Bowl champ?
I mean, he's already a Super Bowl champ. I guess he could become a Jeopardy host after.
Yeah, be the full-time Jeopardy host, right? Or at least the major host.
Yeah, I guess he could do it at the same time. Maybe that would be quite the feat for sure. I'd cheer for it for definitely.
Yeah. So thanks for hopping on, and we'll see you later.